So I'm in my neighborhood at a local park, and as you can see behind me, that building is a Japanese school. And I wanted to talk about my experience of working in a Japanese school for 2 years. And the reason why I want to do it is because at the end of my 2-year run as a assistant language teacher, or lecturer as they call it, I felt pretty emotional about the whole experience. And it all hit me sort of really in the sort of last day or two before it was all over. So this building here is very typical of a Japanese school, roughly 3 or 4 floors, pretty simple layout, just kind of a column style layout where everything is uniform on each of the floors. Now, because kids are involved, and because I worked at an all-girls private school, there's only so much I can show you because obviously it would be inappropriate and I don't want to be considered a creep or anything like that. But I felt like it was worthwhile to share this experience because this is the end of the Japanese school year. So the Japanese school year runs from April to March, which is fairly unique relative to other countries around the world. There are some other countries that share a similar schedule: South Korea, Taiwan. So right now, at this point, my work as a teacher would be done. There would be no more classes for me to be a lecturer in, and the students will be focused on their exams and wrapping up the school year. So it's a wrap, effectively, this time of year in this particular role. Now, you'll hear some background noise. There's some kids in the playground, which is a good thing because when you come to playgrounds quite frequently, you don't see many kids. So Japan has a declining population, and you're starting to really see these very sort of, desolate playgrounds. So anytime I walk by a playground and see kids, it's always like a very welcoming thing, or a very positive thing, I should say. So anyway, let me get into it. So I got to Japan in 2019, and I worked in a conversation school. And when I left that job, I really sort of didn't know what my options were, but I was teaching at the Nara International Exchange Center, where they host some English language classes. And that gave me a chance to work with people outside of conversation schools. And then that turned into one of the classes where someone asked me if I would be interested in teaching at a private school because there was an opening. So, naturally I was interested. I needed another job, and that one came up. And so I was referred to the school principal, and of course, did an interview, and everything worked out. So there I was, and it was a very unique experience relative to a conversation school, because conversation school, you might have at most 4 or 5 students in the class, and when you walk into a Japanese classroom, you're looking at roughly 30, 35 students. Japan's classrooms are quite large relative to other places around the world. The US, you might see a maximum of 30 students in a middle school or a high school, but Japan is quite high at roughly 35 to 40 students per classroom on average. And that held true for my class. That's not my first exposure to Japanese students or school students anyway. I'd worked in several English camps where at some period during sort of the end or the beginning of the school year, many Japanese schools will contract with private companies to hold these English camps to give the students immersion in English language, because typically the students only do a handful of classes, English classes per week, and those are led primarily by Japanese English instructors, unless it's an international school. So it wasn't unfamiliar to me. So I got to the school and learning the ropes. Now, the school was an hour 40-minute commute from where I lived. Once I got to the local train station, I had to walk a mile to the school. Now, it was fine because there was a bus to the school, but I felt like it was just faster to walk to the school, and I needed to exercise too. Now, it was pretty shocking to me because this is my weekly environment, and I went to the school 2 times a week, and I would spend 3 hours at the school during each visit. So I think the biggest thing was facing a classroom that large, standing in front of those students, and they're waiting for your instruction. Now, it wasn't entirely me because most of the students don't have any English proficiency. Actually, the majority of the students don't. Japanese students start learning English in their last year of elementary school, so it's called fifth grade. Now, the way the Japanese school system works is the students will go to elementary school until they're roughly 11 years old, and then they will transition to middle school beginning at 12 years old, spend 3 years in middle school. So they begin as what's called J1, junior high school level 1, and then goes to J3. And then they move to high school where they spend 3 years, and that goes from S1 to S3. And one of the most striking things beyond being a new teacher at the school and learning the ropes was when the J1s come in, they're babies. Like they are, just really learning their way around. And one of the biggest things is their uniforms are too big for many of them. So you're seeing these small kids in these oversized uniforms, and it really gives you perspective on the fact that this is an entirely new level for them. Now, I'm not a parent, so obviously maybe for some parents this is not a big deal, but it was really striking to me, and the fact that many of these students really haven't had interaction with foreign teachers. Japan is one of the most homogenous societies in the world. I believe it's about 95% homogenous, and so to see someone like me is an entirely new experience for these students. Now, getting into it, of course, understanding the role, as a teacher, and obviously being an assistant language teacher to the primary or the lead teacher, that was quite interesting because those teachers are predominantly responsible for the lesson planning, and we have some coordination before the classes and after the classes about what the lesson will be and what my role is. The problem is that many Japanese English teachers aren't really that proficient in English, and so they're really kind of winging it in some ways, and you see some really sort of egregious errors right in the classroom. And as a native speaker, you're sort of astonished that these types of errors are happening, and it's okay. So one of the most striking things was how arrogant it is that someone is tasked to lead an English language course where English is not their primary language, and I'm there to simply support them. And I don't think it's the most effective approach for getting these students to learn English. There's a lot of hand-holding involved, and I think a lot of sort of details are overlooked, which really doesn't help these students develop. And Japan has the lowest ranking for English proficiency among developed countries. So you can see where I'm going with this, hopefully, that a lot of the approach and the methods really are not conducive to helping Japan or Japanese develop any real language proficiency. Now, some of that is by design as well. Japan has a very strong cultural identity, and whether it's spoken explicitly or not, the idea is that developing any real sort of English competency or being a large factor or a influence over their society could change Japanese society. And then the other component too is that it's largely marketing. So parents, when they're making choices about which schools to send their children to, when they see that there is a program with native English instructors, that's a big selling point. But many of these parents, they have no idea that there's really not much, if anything, that their children are gaining from these programs. But it is, it's competitive. I worked in Nara, and Nara borders Osaka Prefecture and Kyoto Prefecture. Kyoto is highly affluent, so they're going to have some of the better schools, and I've worked at programs in Kyoto, and yeah, it absolutely reflects that. It is very affluent, and these kids, they go to some very good schools and get very good educations. And then there's Osaka, which is one of Japan's largest cities. So you're going to have naturally that sort of competition among some of the better Osaka schools for teachers, and then obviously teachers to lead or be part of their English programs. Nara obviously is not a large prefecture, but yeah, there might be a preference to sending their child, for parents to send their children to schools nearby. The other variables at play, other sort of programs that the school offers, and so yeah, naturally there would be marketing of that program, and then adding English instructors into the mix, native-speaking English instructors, is a big selling point. And so I think that's one of the things that I wasn't quite sort of aware of when I joined. The short of it is, you just kind of getting my feet under me, and then at the end of the school term, you have a review with the principal, end of term review with the principal, and I sat with the principal and the assistant principal, and they asked me a question. They asked me my thoughts on the school and the program, which was a bit of a loaded question because I had experience working in other schools, and I guess the principal was looking for me to provide, some feedback or to sort of stroke his ego, and I didn't. I just said, this program is nothing special, and I've seen better, and that they really need to improve the quality of the program as well as the English instruction. And me being in Japan, I think maybe a year and a half at that point, there are things I didn't know, that Japanese are not direct communicators and they don't like conflict. So that probably really offended the principal, which I was unaware of. But also, I have to call it like I see it. And one of the things that was a factor was there are kids involved. And as adults, as professionals, we have to do right by the children. And if we're in here, not with that priority in mind, then I think it's a real poor reflection on us. And we have to really question, what are our priorities and our values? So that was the mindset that I operated with, as well as the two native-speaking English teachers that I worked with. Actually, one wasn't even really quite native. He's from Brazil. The other teacher was from New Zealand, and they were characters as well. I just feel the one teacher had been at the school for over 15 years, and he was a full-time teacher. He was part of the teachers union. Job opportunities in Japan, especially good ones for foreigners, aren't that common. And so he's just sort of trying to protect his existence. So he's punching the clock. And then the other individual, whatever his motivations were, he's trying to catch on with the school to be a full-time teacher, but that's a whole other thing. So the point is to understand sort of how they're motivated. And then me, I didn't want to work in a conversation school any longer, and this particular relationship didn't require a lot of me, but also paid reasonably well considering what was involved in it. That's sort of the sort of backstory around it. But I think over time, especially sort of seeing these kids twice a week and sort of seeing the instruction by the teachers became a very sensitive subject for me. So developed this strong sort of determination, attitude, mindset to really do what's best for these kids without compromise. And so I would push back on the teachers. I would raise my voice, raise my concerns, and again, to the individuals that I mentioned, that's probably a rub. But I have to be me, and I came from the professional world. I think a lot of these teachers, have no real world experience, and can't really prepare these students properly for what's out in the real world. And I just felt like it was negligence to mislead these children and to not give them the best opportunities. And some of the things at play is Japan ranks as one of the worst countries for gender equality, and I think among the worst for a developed country. Also, boys in Japan are highly favored. And me working at an all-girls private school, we have to do our best. Like, there's nothing less. Considering what these girls are up against when they get out into the real world, considering what they're up against just in their day-to-day, there's just no compromise, especially if I'm going to be part of it. And probably the worst thing I could have gotten myself into, because now I see the inner workings of a school, and it conflicts entirely with my principles. So probably not the best thing for me to ever be in that kind of environment. One of the things too that caught me off guard when I first got to Japan is that I would be teaching children. So I worked at a conversation school, and I think one of the final sort of training lessons was to give us, some tips and some examples of how to work with children. And I was like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. That really caught me off guard. And you're supposed to wear a shirt and tie and slacks, and you're dealing with kids anywhere from 2 to 12 years old in terms of what their curriculum is. And yeah, like, how is this supposed to work? I was not equipped for that. I'm not a trained teacher. That really was a surprise for me. And even when I worked at the conversation school, not one of my more pleasant experiences. But, it was what it was. That's, part of the deal. And also teaching children pays more money than teaching adults. And so sometimes when you get kids who are really nice to work with, it can be a very good experience. And as I mentioned, I don't have kids. I'm not familiar with, the ups and downs and the, the different sort of, approaches that parents take with children, or teachers for that matter. So this was a whole other level of different in terms of what I was dealing with. Girls, again, 12 to 14 years old. And I think that really had an effect on me. So going into year 2, obviously, I had some experience under my belt. I was familiar with the school, and it's my second year with the girls, because now they've moved from J1 to J2. So we're really moving along together, and just trying to do my best for them. And again, I didn't change my tact in terms of flagging things that I felt were wrong or suboptimal. And I think it just kind of got to a point where you start to see the personalities and you start to see the motivations, and realizing that this is not something that could continue. And also it's the commitment as well, determining whether I could carry through an entire school year with the girls or with the students. You can't abandon them, because obviously you're a familiar face, and that's what they look for, or that's what they're prepared for week to week. I stuck it out for year 2. And one of the other things I want to say about all of it is Japan is a high context culture, so a lot of things are understood without being explicitly spoken. That's one of the things that really separates Japanese culture from Western culture. And so, there's, sometimes over attention to detail, so that there's nothing ambiguous. There's obviously high trust factor here among people. There's also high safety. But one of the things too is that with many of the English camps I worked in, with the 2 native speakers at the school I worked at, and then just even seeing what goes on inside a Japanese classroom, was that parents really should be looking more closely at who their children are interacting with. These individuals that I worked with, a good majority of them should not be allowed around children. I won't say the word explicitly, but I have a hierarchy. There are the P people, and then there are foreign teachers in Japan. That's my hierarchy of people who should not be around children. And I just wish that parents, asked the schools and really spoke with the teachers, and really there was, more sort of vetting around who these teachers are, and who these parents allow around their children. But obviously that can rub people the wrong way. Maybe even in the U.S. that could be a thing. I don't know how it is in Western cultures, but if I had children, I would want to know who's going to be around my child, because again, you see some of these individuals. It's literally throw on a halfway decent shirt and pants and a tie. Maybe, and that's, so open your mouth. Hey, I speak English. Okay, that's good enough, right? No, that's not good enough. Again, we're dealing with young lives, and they don't get to make their own choices, and many of them don't speak up about things that are wrong. Some other things: Japan has one of the highest suicide rates in the world. They rank 4th, but among children under 19 years old or young adults, Japan has the highest suicide rate. And there are many factors. It could be things, family-related matters. It could be the pressures of school. There could be bullying, or just being unable to fit in. And so there's really no one to defend these kids, and there are really not many resources for these kids to speak about their troubles. speak about, some of the issues or concerns that they have, or just even flag when something's wrong. So at the end of year two, it sort of reached a boiling point. I wanted to change my schedule because I was coming to school 6 hours a week. You're talking roughly 3.5 hours of commute time round trip, and it was just really very disruptive to my week. I wanted a situation where I came to school only once a week, spent the entire day, and did my lessons with J1 and did my lessons with J2, and that's that. The school wouldn't agree to it, and then there was, I guess, some brokering of decisions that I wasn't involved in between the native teachers and the school principal, which also was a real rub for me because I felt like, hey, if it's an issue that pertains to me, you should be having the conversation with me directly. But I think, again, in a culture that is indirect and does not particularly like confrontation, the principal probably just had enough of me and wanted nothing to do with me. And that was fine. But I do think professionally it warrants a direct conversation and not a third party or a proxy or anything of that matter. So a line was crossed at that point. So once again, I'm in a situation where I have to let people know who I am. And that's not an ego thing, but I just feel like professionally, a dialogue could have taken place. So one of the things that you have to be aware of in Japanese culture is that they don't always read resumes, or at least the way we sort of interpret them in Western culture. And obviously in Western culture, not reading someone's resume can be viewed very badly, whereas here it's commonly an oversight. It's more sort of how you fit within sort of the structure and the comfort level, and whether they feel that there is going to be continuity in the relationship. So when the decision was made for me not to return to the school without sort of me having any input into the conversation, one of the teachers that I worked with raised a concern to the principal, and even she didn't know that I had worked for Apple. Now, even though I'd worked for Apple several years ago, that's regarded very highly in Japan. Those sort of upper tier experiences are highly valued in Japan, regardless of when they occurred. And so suddenly the tone or the attitude changed, and now the principal wants to have a direct conversation with me. But as I mentioned, the line was crossed and it was too late at that point. When things reached the boiling point with the school, I also understood that I was threatening people's livelihoods. For someone like myself, I don't do this to keep a roof over my head. So certainly, those individuals would be motivated to sort of get me out of the fold because they have much more at stake than I do. I can't fault them for that. That's not a path I certainly would take. I just think there's no end game, there's no roadmap, or there's no runway, I should say, with teaching English. Now we have things like AI. We also have outsourced English teaching to countries like the Philippines, for example. So it's not for me to spill it out to them. They'll see in their proper time. On the souls of fallen enemies, and the tears for those who have suffered and have lived in the aftermath of the devastation. All I can say is that, there's just going to be no glory in crossing me. Yeah, that's just where I stand. I want to give some perspective on the young ladies that I worked with. Many come in without English language proficiency, as I mentioned earlier, but some of the kids are quite strong. They have parents who have either lived abroad or have invested in their English language development. And so considering the curriculum and obviously the lessons, these lessons really were too simple, not challenging for these young ladies. So you have a lot of young ladies who were checked out. And then, there are some kids who just don't like English. At that age, 12 years old and upward, they have their minds made up about what they like and don't like. And so this is something they have to do because it's part of the school program. And so you're dealing with those things too. As I mentioned, boys are highly favored in Japan. And so my goal for the girls was really to always make them feel successful, to build their confidence. So even the ones who were afraid of English, don't like English, no matter what the situation was, to really sort of always sort of give them that sense of success, even in situations that might have been uncomfortable for them. And that was, something I think you could see really resonated with these girls in terms of, their confidence levels, their demeanor in the classroom, but even how they interacted with me. And getting into the interactions too, that was pretty cool because, some of the students, they've not really been around foreigners, and so they try to find a way to, build a relationship or communicate with you in various ways. Oftentimes at the beginning or before the beginning of class, the girls would hover around me or ask me questions or giggle, that sort of thing, which was pretty cool. And then of course some of the kids wanted nothing to do with me, but obviously I maintained a uniform standard that anyone was subject to being called on or asked to participate. But I think, some of the other real highlights for me also was seeing how well they did, during, conversation tests or during presentations, or seeing what the opportunities were for them in those particular situations. And then, I guess like, the sort of, popular teacher vibe too, walking through the hallways and hearing, groups of girls screaming, for my attention. So I guess I was doing something right. So I was really, invested in those girls, always coming into it, with my best, and then really sort of, sort of striking the balance where you're an example because, many Japanese don't have chances to interact with foreigners. Also, considering my professional background, but then also the other thing too is being able to sit with them and help them, whether it's individually or as a group if they're doing group activities, really rolling up my sleeves. Again, giving that sort of assurance, that belief that these girls will succeed, that they can do it. So that was really, really powerful for me. And then, there were some classes, some of the students are stronger than others. And so considering that also, there weren't really many expectations for the lower level classes, but I always disagreed with that. I always found that the lower level classes, they were the ones, who were the most spirited oftentimes and tried the hardest. So those classes I was really proud of and really look forward to working with them. But I loved all of my classes. The J ones were much lower level, so just helping them, get acclimated to a new environment, and even, sort of the sessions that we had week to week, for our English classes. But again, instilling that standard as well. So that was that. So, when it all came to an end, or as it was coming to an end, one of our final lessons was a focus on Steve Jobs and his commencement speech at Stanford University. I believe that was 2005. And as we were in our final lessons, I wanted to give the girls a relevant example of those things from Steve Jobs' speech, because obviously, those things are on a page, but illustrating to them how I've followed a similar path. Obviously, I worked at Apple too, and there were 3 themes to Steve Jobs' speech. One was connecting the dots. Watashi tachi wa Steve Jobs-san ga Stanford University no graduation message hanashimashita. And there are 3 lessons from that speech that I want to talk to you about. And so first is connecting the dots. And I can relate to connecting the dots as it relates to Steve Jobs' message because I came to Japan for the first time 15 years ago. And when I came, I never imagined, 1, living in Japan, and 2, being here in this classroom with you. It has been absolutely amazing, and I am so thankful for it. We've had really some great times, and we've traveled together, and we've grown together in our 2 years in these classes. I never, imagined living in Japan. I came to Japan for the first time 15 years ago, and I was in Nara. I didn't know where I was going, but Nara looked like an interesting place. I went to Nara Park, and while around Nara Park, I met these three high school girls, and they were S3s, and you can tell they're S3 because as the students move on in their academic careers, the clothing that they wear becomes more formal. Now at that time, it was still relatively uncommon for Japanese to see foreigners. And so, of course, when some might see a foreigner, they want to take a picture, and that opportunity came up with those girls. Number two was love and loss. In the 2 years that I've worked with you, I've grown to love you. And I know that some of you don't like me, but I love you. And now I'm losing you, and I'm very sad about that. In terms of, love and loss, that was pretty powerful for me because I don't have children, as I mentioned earlier, and just sort of imagining what that would be like as a parent. And so these were my kids, 96 of them. They were my babies, and they'll always be my babies. That was a really hard thing. We started 2 years ago, and the J1s, again, coming in, they looked like babies. Their uniforms were oversized. And we traveled together for 2 years. They helped me grow. And then number three was death and dying. It's been a wonderful 2 years. We've had our good days and we've had some not so good days, but we've all made it through. And for me, it's always been great days. When I'm an old man, I will look back fondly on this time with you and have many happy memories. And so when that time comes, I'll always have this here with you. Never imagined from that moment that I could actually be in a setting where I'm teaching young ladies like those in the picture. I hope one or more of them are looking at this video or will stumble across this video and see this conversation. And so the final thing that I'll say, and this was to the girls, is one, to always do your best in everything. You don't have to like English, you don't have to be good at English, but whether it's English or anything else, just try your best. For English can take you places. It can help you make new friends, and it can create new opportunities for you. So just think about that. Also, respect. You may not like something, you may not agree with something, but respect it. Always try to see the other point of view. And finally, the last thing I want to say is also be kind to people. Kindness goes a long way. You can really help someone with kindness. And so those were my messages to them. And it was a really, it's a really important message for me to deliver because, I wanted to leave something with them, even though they're only junior high school students, but something that they could sort of relate to, at least on a basic level. So that's this chapter of my experience here in Japan. I don't know if I'll return to the academic world, and for obvious reasons, what I mentioned previously in the video, but if I do return to academics, it would be at the university level. I think there's, a lot more autonomy at that level, sort of dictate the structure in a more balanced way. Finally, from what I learned from that teaching experience and just education in general, is if I ever do have my own children, I would not put them in a school, at least at any serious level. I would homeschool them. To be fair to my own kids, I would send them to school simply for the purpose of social interactions and development with their peers. But from an actual purely academic perspective, I would tell my children to be polite and respectful to the teachers. I just don't think that I found anything of real value from what I observed. And so that would be sort of my approach. And then also, it would be problematic as well because, again, from what I understand, what I've observed, it would be a weekly conversation with the teachers or with the principal. I just couldn't sort of let my guard down or let my awareness wane for anything related to my own children and their, academic development, their future path, and also just the types of people that they might be exposed to on a day-to-day basis. So that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. I've turned off the comments for this video because this is a deeply personal topic to me, as you can understand. I understand that some might disagree or be offended, but this is simply my perspective and my values. I'm sure, obviously, there are other points of view. But once again, thanks for watching. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button. And if you haven't, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Minasan, kyou wa minasan to isho ni sugosu saigo no jugyo desu. Demo, I want to say to you a few things before we go our separate ways. First, it's been absolutely wonderful working with you for the last 2 years. We've all made it through, and for me, it's always been great days. And so I want you to just continue to do your best, and I'll always be thinking of you and wishing the best for you. And so here I say farewell. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu.